Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's indeed a pleasure to be here, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity, especially for the LUMS Religious Society. Should I hold this or?
Yeah.
Okay, I can hold this, but I'll need to leave it for my glasses because my eyesight isn't too great. So, like I said, it's a privilege to be here. I'm going to further introduce myself a little bit. As what was your name? Sorry. Hania said, my name is Abeda Ahmad, and I am a qualified counselor. I've been into the business of therapy for more than the last 15 years, and I work primarily with an organization, a UK-based organization called Relate. And Relate, basically, they specialize in relationships. So that means that we get to work with individuals, couples, and then families. And quite 3-4 years into my Relate career, I realized that we weren't getting enough Asian and Muslim clients through the Relate doors, mainly not because we don't have issues as Muslims, purely because our issues are slightly different and slightly more complex than the mainstream that I work in, which is obviously Britain. And then what I did, I decided to set up my own personal counseling service by the name of Amana. And part of the week, what I do is I just work with Muslim clients. And these could be young Muslims. I do a lot of work with university students, so I have quite a good network with the ISOCs. So I work with students who have anxiety, depression, some young girls who might have eating disorders, and all sorts. Part of the week I work just with couples, and I get my referrals for the marriage counseling through our local GPs and also to the masajid in Birmingham. So when somebody has issues in their marriage, they might go to their local imam and talk about their difficulties, and they would then signpost them to have some counseling sessions. And alhamdulillah, I've been doing that quite successfully. Lately, for the last 5, 6, 7 years, what I noticed was that I was getting more and more referrals that on the surface would be just about any issue. But as I would progress into the counseling, I was realizing that a lot of young people, male and female both, unfortunately, were struggling with porn addiction. And although I was using my general skills to work with those clients, but I realized that that was obviously a specialism. And then that's when I decided to train in porn addiction, and I did the whole year's course, and I became the first Muslim trained therapist with that qualification. And that's what I'm doing now. So part of the week I work for... So with that, part of the week I work with an organization called the Laurel Center, and I basically facilitate any clients that need any faith-based therapy. Because obviously as Muslims, whether we call ourselves practicing or not, the important thing is that we all connect with Islam, and the whole concept of shame and the relationship with Allah and the hereafter, and then the concept of sin is such a core thing for Muslims that it's really important to address that. So inshallah, the reason why I decided to talk about the Sexualized Society is that I feel that there is an innate link between the two topics. So obviously we will begin to talk about the sexualization of the society, and then later on towards the middle of the talk, inshallah, I'll talk more about what porn addiction is and how does it impact our brain, basically. Because obviously neuroscientists, they've done a lot of research, and they've now given this a category. So we have to approach this, and that's my approach anyway, that we're not going to minimize it, we're not going to normalize it, and we don't validate it. So we don't say that it's okay because it impacts our brain. The reality is that we have to approach it in a psychological way so that we can take the element of shame away from it and treat it. So we're not encouraging people. And that's the misconception, I believe. Maybe we would have had more people, I presume, but a lot of people feel ashamed. And that's what I'm trying to break as a practicing person with a lady with a hijab in front of you. If I can take that first step, come here, stand in front of you, talk about such a difficult topic, I feel that would give you that confidence that just because a topic is difficult and awkward does not mean we just brush it under the carpet, because it's not going to go away. And I hope you all will agree with that. So how does Okay, yeah, that's all right. Okay, so is it okay if I sit down? Okay, Bismillah, right. So the thing is that when we look at defining sexualization, some of you might be quite surprised that the term was coined by some work that social workers were doing in the 70s around child sexual abuse. So that's where sexualization came as a term. So you need to automatically make that connection that when we talk about sexualization of the society, we're actually talking about sexual abuse as well. And a lot of people don't make that connection. So what it means is that when something is sexual or out of character, and it also means that making somebody aware of their sexuality, and it's also a thing about sexual objectification, which means that the other person feels that they're only valuable if they enhance themselves in a sexual context. Which again becomes a huge issue for young people, especially for young girls, where they feel that they will be important, they will be accepted, and they would be more appreciated if they glorify themselves, if they doll themselves up in such a way, which is problematic because women and men both, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made us ashraful makhluqat, and we're more than what we are in the visual sense. So there's more to us, both for men and women. We're not just what we look like. It's all about our inner character, our our personality, our conduct. All those things are obviously very important. Now, if you think about defining sexuality, I don't think we can do anything without looking at the contribution of media. I don't think anybody in this room would disagree when we talk about media's contribution in sexualization of the society. If you think about what media does in this day and age, it kind of blurs the distinction between women and girls. So what is happening, which we call a trickle up and trickle down effect, which means that young girls, as young as 3, 4, and 5, their parents, well, mostly unfortunately their mothers, they can go out, they can buy little bikini tops from them, they can buy crop tops for little girls. So there is almost that opportunity for little girls to look like adults. And at the same time for adults, for ladies, it's become quite mandatory for older women to look quite young. So the whole cosmetic industry exploits this whole thing about age. So this thing about anti-age creams and this obsession about Botox, this obsession about making yourself wrinkle-free is unfortunately, again, it's an offshoot from sexualization, and it's something that unfortunately is exploiting our women. And men now as well. I don't want to exclude the brothers here because that's a thing. I mean, I know for sure that in the media industry, a lot of young people are really, young men are so obsessed about how they look. So there are parlors where men go for their grooming, and they get everything, basically what was used to be a women's prerogative now is available and accessible for men as well, which is quite problematic. So how many of you girls, especially when they were young, had Barbie dolls, for instance? Are there any in the audience that have ever had a Barbie doll? Or, okay, quite a few at the back. Right. What about brats? Any of you had brats? Sorry, I'm just going to pick that up in a bit. Quite a few. Okay. Now, if you think about how Barbies and brats were used, do you guys remember how Barbies looked? I mean, for a little girl who is 5, 7, 10, the doll was. Do you remember how Barbies looked? So they were very pristine in their appearance, very well groomed. The figure was quite. It was an adult basically, and the reason why that has a negative impact is that from a very young age. So we know now psychologists, they would tell us, child psychologists, they would tell us that the ages from 0 to 7 is a very vulnerable age. That's a very impressionable age. Now, if we allow young girls to associate with dolls like Barbies at that age, and that's what that it means is that subconsciously what we're learning is we allowing our young children to associate that that's the norm. That's how a girl should look like. Because obviously we have a huge attachment with our toys. I can still remember my back in the days. Obviously I'm an old lady, so I'm from the dinosaurs age. But the rag dolls that I had were growing up. So you have that association with your toys. So it's really important to understand what the toy industry is doing to young girls as well. Who has heard of this the term spiritual adipsia? Who is familiar with that? So. Anybody? Any guesses? Without reading the slide. So basically, when what this means is that is the lack of thirst. Basically, sometimes people don't really have any desire to drink, and that's a medical condition. Unfortunately, sometimes people don't get thirsty at all, and unfortunately, as a society, because of the way capitalism has taken over, people have foregone that desire, that thirst, to connect with themselves spiritually. So a lot of us are more concerned about what's happening outwardly. So whether it's our education, whether it's our job, whether it's our home, whether it's our appearance, it's all about the visual. Nobody wants to know what's in me. So our relationship with our soul, unfortunately, has gone away. And in a bit, inshallah, I'll talk about a balance that now people are talking about in the West, especially now. They kind of in the West, they go to the extreme and then they decide, no, we were wrong, so they go to the other extreme. So now people are talking about a good balance of mind, body, and soul. So what West did for a very long time, they gave up on the idea of the soul completely. So those of you who are psychology students, you would know that initially psyche was this, the science of this mind, basically the soul, right? So psychology was the science of the soul. But they took out the soul bit completely. And the psychology became the subject of the mind. But now we know that mental health is not just about the mind. It's about the emotions. It's about the feelings. So it's a combination. A healthy person is the one who has a good balance of mind, body, soul. And I hope you guys will agree with that. Now, if we think about what has happened over the years, and I would say in the last 30, 40 years, things have gone to an extreme where we've kind of lost this whole thing about how do we address these issues. So has any of you does this look familiar? Has any of you, the first one is Pakiza. So how many, maybe your parents know more about this, I'm sorry. But, and the second one is a film called Marajan. They're both Indian films, but the reason why I thought they were quite interesting was that they talked about sexual exploitation a lot. They talked about sex slavery a lot. But the way they addressed these films was that they made it quite modest almost, in a way that people could watch them and you could talk about them, and they weren't really in your face kind of horrible things that you wouldn't want to view in a family context. So what I'm trying to say to you guys is that there's a way to address these issues, right? So we can't just hide away from problems around sexuality, and we can't go to the other extreme where we think that this is not relevant to us because it's a Western problem, right? It's a problem that we have. And how do we know it's a problem that we have? Things like if you go onto the Google search, last year I believe I heard this figure that the most the search that was most popular on Google Pakistan was porn site search. And I don't know how credible that thing is, but obviously it was in media all over the place. And that was quite worrying. So we can't just say that this is not a Muslim world problem. And we certainly cannot say that this is not a Pakistani problem. Now, that means that if Google is telling us that a lot of young people are looking for these sites, that means this is a problem. Out of interest, how many of you guys think it's a problem? I mean, you're here, so I presume you're obviously quite interested in understanding more about it. But do you think it is a problem, or do you think we just hyped it up a bit? It's a trendy thing to talk about these days. You guys agree that it is a problem? Okay. Right, so I'm glad you agree, because if you had said no, I would have brought some evidence from your TV actually. So this clip was on social media. Some of you might have seen this, the one on the right with a girl with the bag. I mean, this girl is hardly 5, 6, 7 years old, right? And this was, I presume it was a daytime TV show, or this was a morning show. I'm not sure who Seher Lodi is. I've seen this clip. But whoever he is, he's obviously contributing a lot, both in sexualization of women and in both on abuse of children, basically, because this is disgusting. Why would you want a 5, 7, 10-year-old to be indulging in all that? Why? And as a society, why would we normalize it? Why would we say it's okay? Because honestly speaking, I don't even see this in the West. So this was, for me, this was quite worrying. And I thought maybe what's happening is because it's TV, and most of our mindset, we think TV is safe, right? Because TV is the stuff that we go to. It's in the living room. It's okay. And maybe we've kind of overlooked this. Now the thing on the left is, it's more worrying, to be honest with you as well, because this was again, Bata is our shoe company, right? Right? So this was again a company where this guy, can you guys read what it says? Yeah, exactly. Now who would say that? That's disgusting, isn't it? Why would you call this, why would you be okay? First, being a womanizer, it's a horrible thing to begin with. And why would you say you're comfortable? Why can this be allowed to be a billboard or a campaign, really? So this was obviously made somewhere. That's what I thought as well. So I thought maybe that's what I need to do, give them the benefit of doubt. Ignorance is not really an excuse, is it? So, exactly. With ignorance, obviously, there's exploitation. Because what we do with messages like this, we normalize it. And this links quite nicely with unfortunately, with the campaign we recently had, the global campaign about Me Too campaign and Enough is Enough campaign. So who was following the Me Too campaign? A lot of people, right? So this whole thing about sexual harassment, this whole thing about Harvey Weinstein, the unfortunately one of the biggest scandals in Hollywood for this century, was this whole thing about exploitation of women. And if you think about it, all of these things, they link with each other. And that's what I want you guys to think about, how, not just in Pakistan, obviously, I'm not singling out our country at all, but in the West generally, and then in the East, this whole thing about sexualization and then exploitation, because the women that Harvey Weinstein was exploiting, they were all educated, liberated, famous Hollywood actresses. Why were they exploited? If you think about it, what was going on there? Now the reality is that if society normalizes all this, then women can just take things without questioning whether it's okay or not. So I hope, inshallah, you guys will recognize the connection. Right, so how many of us here have heard of Game of Thrones? Right, okay. So Game of Thrones again was, like I said, it trended as #2 on Twitter in Pakistan, which means that a lot of people know about Game of Thrones. Now the thing with Game of Thrones is that it has huge problems. Honestly, I don't know where to start with Game of Thrones. But if you just look at the episodes, if you haven't watched, you might think I'm quite sad because I've done a lot of research on this. But this is only purely because I want to really make this point, and I wanted to back it up with a lot of evidence. So apparently in 61 episodes, there were 71 nude and sex scenes in the show. Now think about that. It's a TV show. It's not porn. It's a TV show. Now, you're watching a TV show, you're not even thinking I'm going on an illegal site or anything, because Netflix is allowing you to watch it, or whatever your source is here in Pakistan. What does that mean? That means that they're actually tricking you into normalizing something which is not good for you. Because later on when we talk about sex addiction and porn addiction, you guys will realize that it becomes okay when it becomes a norm, right? Because mostly what we do is we are desensitized, right? And the most appalling thing was that in one of the episodes, which is in season 4, a character called Jamie he was shown raping his own sister. Now, how messed up and disgusting is that? But it becomes quite normal, and what we think is it's something that is not real. It's happening on the screen. It doesn't really impact me, so it's just entertainment. But the reality is that it has an impact. It leaves an impression. What it tells you is that it's okay to be like that. And obviously, a lot of these stories, they are picked up from some reality, right? So that's another discussion. Now, another thing is that in 2013 or 12, I believe, one of the leading characters, what he said, and that was a YouTube clip, what he did was he was interviewed by journalists. They were sitting at the panel, and one of the leading characters, what he said was, one of the good things about Game of Thrones is that you get to rape beautiful women on screen. And the reaction from the audience they were just laughing. Nobody thought, what the hell is this man saying? How can he laugh about raping beautiful women and normalize it? And it took the media and the journalists about 3-4 years for that statement to become a big thing, and then people were questioning him, and then he had to retract his statement and all that. But I guess what I'm trying to say to you is that we become desensitized. If something is shown to us again and again and again, and a good example for that is how many of us look at what's happening in Syria or Palestine, all those things. On social media, it's like, it's always there. It's plastered on social media walls. And how quickly do we scroll from one news to another quickly? You can look at something horrific in Syria, and then the next minute you can go on to a friend's wedding photos or something. And that does something. That makes us that we become bystanders. We become desensitized, and we make things normal, right? And psychologically, obviously, that's very problematic. Okay, so some more statistics. If you guys can see all that, then I'm not going to go through a lot. But I think the point what I really want to make here is that in season 1, when we talk about 33 naked people, 88 of them were women and 12 were men. So throughout this thing, the statistics are, for instance, in season 4, 91% were women and 9% were men. So what they've done is, obviously, they're doing something completely wrong anyway. Obviously, it's haram for us, as we understand that. But the reality is that they're making women more of a trash, really, more of a downtrodden thing. And this is done in the West, right? So this concept that women are just oppressed in the East, or in a village in, I don't know, Sakkar or somewhere in a downtrodden village in Pakistan, I think we need to really wake up and look at what's happening in the West as well. Because like I said, Harvey Weinstein just happened this year gone, right? So I really want you guys to connect with what you're watching and think of a media detox in some way, or kind of at least think about choose what you want to watch. Kind of think of what are you getting from that content. I think that's very, very important. Right. So that's going to bring me on to what I want to really address tonight, inshallah, is talking about pornography. Now, if you look at the history of pornography in the 19th century, what basically at that point what pornography was, obviously the origin is that it's a Greek word, and porn is prostitute, and graphy is just writing about prostitution, basically. That's what it was in the 19th century. The people would write about this whole thing about, the way the songs are in Bollywood, depicting a beautiful or a lustrous woman or that kind of thing, right? But gradually it went from that writing onto something visual, which we all know about, obviously. And in today's society, obviously, things have changed a lot. And I know this from firsthand, because a lot of male clients that I work with who are struggling with porn addiction, they would say to me that their first understanding of anything sexual comes from pornography. So as young as 13, as young as 15 or whatever, a friend would give them a magazine or a tape or a whatever, or a link or something, And that would be their first understanding of sex education. And which again is a huge problem in a country like ours, where we can't even think about introducing a topic of sex education in school because we think we shouldn't talk about this. Now, my difficulty with that is that we follow a religion where our beloved Prophet ﷺ talked about almost everything. The Sahaba used to come to the Prophet with all sorts of difficulties, with all sorts of practical daily life questions. And a lot of that, where do we know Islamically the whole thing about contraception? Where do we learn that? The whole thing about foreplay in a relationship. The Prophet ﷺ actually explicitly explained to his companions how should they approach intimacy. So the whole topic of intimacy is addressed so beautifully in Islam. The relationship that the Prophet ﷺ had, especially with Aisha. And because that's my topic, I'm very passionate about that. I work with young couples where they have intimacy issues or other problems. And I refer a lot to the relationship, the beautiful, beautiful relationship that the Prophet had with Khadija and then Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anhum both. And it's very explicit. I mean, if you think about it, it's a lot of detail. It's a lot of detail. For instance, we know that the Prophet ﷺ and Khadija, for instance, they would bathe in a vessel of water that was communal. They would share that. Now, if you think about those little details, why do we need to know that? We need to know that because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has addressed a lot of issues for us and they've given the solution. The problem is we don't want to go there. We don't want to learn about this era. And that's why there's that huge gap where we've turned to these issues, unfortunately. Right. So, like I said, this whole thing about porn addiction, it is a cycle. And I'll explain the cycle more in a bit, inshallah. Now, before I do, just need 1 minute, just going to have a sip of water. Right, So for these case studies, what I've done is I've obviously changed the names, but the case studies are real. So these are clients that I've worked with myself. Usman is a 31-year-old, and he's struggled with porn since the age of 18. He has a good career in IT. He's quite connected with the deen. He prays. He tries and go to the masjid as much as he can. He has beard, mashallah. He is married, obviously, and he has 3 children. He's quite a committed person in this relationship, but because of his porn addiction, he has huge issues in his marriage, obviously, understandably. Now, the thing is, when you just look at that information and nothing else, you might think Usman is a horrible person. He has no moral values. He should go to Jahannam, obviously, because obviously he's committing the zina of the eyes. And by the way, if you know of any Usman who is 31 years old and who has a beard, who has 3 children, that's not him, right? Because I've just arrived from the UK and this is not even Usman, right? So I've just picked up the name Usman, so please don't go and exploit your friends, right? That's not my intention, so please don't do that. So going back to Usman, like I said, on the surface, if you just know this about Usman, you might think, oh my God, I don't want to know this person. I wouldn't even want to know them at all. They can't be my friend. And what a horrible profile. What a horrible thing to do if they're indulging in all that. But the reality is that Usman was sexually abused from the age of 6 till 9 by 2 of his close family members. He was regularly sexually abused by 2 male people in his family. For those 2 years, he went through so much trauma and he couldn't talk to anybody. He couldn't tell his mom. He couldn't tell his dad suddenly. And he couldn't talk to anybody about that. And there was a time in his life when his mom and dad they went to Hajj. So he was left with these people for 3 weeks. And his mom and dad obviously had no idea, because who else do you leave your kids with when you want to go somewhere, right? You leave them in the care of your nearest and dearest family members, right? And those 3 weeks were the most testing 3 weeks of Usman's life. Now, because of the fact that he went through all that abuse, now please understand that I'm not justifying the choices that Usman is making now. And I'm not minimizing it. I'm just giving you guys a context that the reason why he has and out of control sexualized behavior there is a reason behind that. So now, after a year of therapy, what we've done is we've given closure to a lot of open wounds. So he was given permission to talk about what happened to him. He was able to let go of that guilt and shame, because for all these years what he thought was, there's something really wrong with me. I can't be a good person. Why would this happen to me? Maybe there's something really wrong with me. And subconsciously, if that's what he was thinking, he had no self-esteem. When you have no self-esteem and when you have no confidence, you make really rubbish choices because you think, I'm really low and rubbish anyway. And for a lot of people, porn becomes an anesthetizing tool, which means that you use it to dumb down your senses, basically, like you would take paracetamol, really, because it kind of alters your reality and you're looking at something which is not real, right? So for a lot of people, they stumble on this accidentally and then they get hooked, obviously, very quickly. So like I said, this is not just a male problem. Unfortunately, it's a female problem. Now again, for anybody who knows Nadia, 23-year-old, is not Nadia at all. This is somebody else. And she, unfortunately, she's a Somalian Muslim girl, and she stumbled onto these sites at the age of 12, and she's never been able to stop. Now she's a university student, and she has huge psychological issues. She has anxiety, she has depression, because she cannot stop the behavior that she's indulging in because it's addictive, but she feels very guilty at the same time. And because of the guilt and the shame, she feels like a hypocrite. She feels like, okay, I cover, I pray, but when in the secrecy of my bedroom, what I'm doing makes me a really horrible person. So I'm a really horrible person, so I don't deserve to socialize with good people. And that keeps her more in isolation. So unfortunately, that's Nadia's difficulty. Now these are stats that we had from one of our Middlesex universities in London, where they say that about 53% of 11 to 16-year-olds, they have viewed explicit material online. Nearly all of them, 53% of all of the 11 to 16-year-old, and 94% of all of them have seen it by the age of 14. Now this is not just limited to the UK, because if you think about what's happening in Pakistan, like I said, if this is Google is telling us that #1 trending thing on Google in search is pornography sites, then that means that we know, although we haven't really collected enough data as yet in this detail, we know that this is a problem that we have here as well, right? Now, why can't we stop this? Why can't we just say, oh, it's haram, just not go there? Basically, if you look at the stats, it's quite mind-boggling that porn industry actually is a $97 billion industry, which is more than Apple, Google, Netflix, Yahoo combined. And that's just mega, is it? I mean, if you think about the magnitude of how much influence porn industry has over the world. 50 to 75% of men, and these are obviously verified statistics, I didn't make them up. Worldwide, if you think about the viewing, it's 50 to 70%. And 68% million requests daily of such material. And Your Brain on Porn is a website where people go on to seek help for porn addiction, and they are so busy. Their website, the traffic on their website is that they get about 20,000 unique visitors. So young people are really struggling. And the difficulty with this is that because there's so much shame attached to it. So if anybody has this issue, they're not going to speak to their friend, they're not going to speak to the parents, because the fear of judgment. I mean, if you think about it, if anybody comes up to you, because obviously I do this as a profession, so I deal with it very differently. But out of curiosity, if somebody comes to you and they say they have a problem, what do you think you'll do? Anybody? I mean, what do you think people would do? Exactly. You humiliate the person, you judge them, you don't want to see them anymore. You might unfriend them from your social media because you think, they're not really, you don't want to invite them to the house, whatever, because that's a reaction most people have. So as a and the reality is that the more people stay in silence, the more shame takes over, And the more shame takes over, Islamically we know this whole thing about how shaitan isolates us. So there's a difference between shame and remorse, right? So shame tells you that you're this big. Shame tells you you're worthless. Shame tells you you're unredeemable. Shame tells you there's no hope, you're doomed for Jahannam. That's what shame does. But remorse tells you you made a mistake, You've stumbled, you've slipped. So slip is a small lapse in progress. So slip is what? Slip is you made a mistake. And you do your sincere though when you go through what, we talk about the stages and the requirements was you sincerely repent, you make that strong intention, and then you believe that, okay, I'm not the problem. I'm a person who has a small problem. Allah made me ashraful makhluqat. My problem does not define me as a person. I am a good person with a problem. So this doesn't define my whole personality. I can get rid of this. So it's important to make that distinction, inshallah. We all know that our religion allows us to make tawbah, to seek istighfar and be better. I mean, how many of us know about the story of Umar bin Khattab in the morning? He was so raged, he was so hyped up, he wanted to astaghfirullah, go and kill the Prophet ﷺ. And from that day towards the afternoon, he took the shahada and he became a Muslim, right? So there is so much hope in Islam. And we know that, and this is one of my things that really gets to me, is that, Ibn Qayyim, he said that whoever shames his brother for a sin, he will be tested with the same sin. So I think it's really important that we, as a community, as a society, we let go of that judgment. And we all know, unfortunately, religious people, unfortunately, throughout the world, we have that stigma and unfortunately we have that label that we judge people. So that famous thing, apologies to any niqabi sisters in the audience, but that thing that people say, that the niqabi looks down on the hijabi and the hijabi looks down on the sister without the hijab, and the one without the hijab might look down upon the one without full sleeves or something, right? So it's that mindset that we feel that we're up there. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want. And we know that this is obviously a famous dua that we learn from the Prophet ﷺ, who says that, praise be to Allah, who has saved me from what He has inflicted them with, and for honoring me of many of His creations. So that's the dua that Prophet taught us that we make when we see somebody else is struggling, because we could so easily be in their position. So it's really important to address things with compassion rather than with judgment. Right. So where does this term come from? So the sex addiction, porn addiction is a term that came out of America in the 80s. So Patrick Kahn is the one who coined this term. And what he basically defined this as a sexual behavior that's not safe. So safe means that it's in secret, it's abusive, as in that it harms the person or others. And it's void of it kind of used to avoid painful feelings. So like I said, why people watch porn is to detract their minds from other things. So if they're suffering from anxiety, depression, sometimes that's what they do in their rooms without connecting with the world outside, right? And he also said that it leaves the person with an empty feeling. So it's a behavior that's outside a caring or committed relationship. So porn addiction is obviously this whole thing about watching something. Sex addiction is when people cannot commit to one relationship, and they have to hop on to, and in the West obviously, and I feel now unfortunately in the East as well, and in the Muslim Ummah as well, this is becoming a bigger problem, right? Where people can pay to go to sex workers or to prostitutes. And the thing is that nobody needs to know what you're doing. The thing with other addictions is that if it's a chemical addiction, what it does to our brain is that people are chemically addicted to alcohol or to other stuff like cocaine and stuff. It alters our behavior, right? So if you see a drug addict, you can tell that he's all over the place. They don't talk to you nicely. Alcoholics present a really larger than life performer. They're really all over the place. But the thing with porn addiction is that people can be quite normal on the surface, because you can't really tell a porn addict when you look at them. You can't tell they're porn addicts, right? because on the surface they're normal, so they can hold a normal job during the day. They, like I said, they, like Usman, they work, they have children, all sorts of things. But that's the difficulty. That's why it's dangerous. That's why we have to really address this. So this is furthermore, this is a more definition of what porn addiction is. Now, I've talked about some of this already when I said it can be because of the emotional trauma. So, for instance, in my case studies, both those young people were emotionally and sexually, emotionally, psychologically abused. So with Nadia, what I did, I forgot to mention that Nadia has witnessed a lot of physical violence from her father, both to her and her mother. So all children in that family, what they've seen growing up was that their father would regularly physically abuse their mum on a regular basis. A lot of abuse in that house. So obviously she's experienced a lot of trauma. Now there is so what I'm trying to explain to you is that there would be different ways of how a young person can become addictive to these things. So culture obviously plays a big role, where because we normalize things like Game of Thrones, for instance, going back to that, and I'm sorry about using the same example again and again. If on a regular basis if somebody's watching that, that means that when we switch from that to something which is more pornographic in its nature, we're not going to really bat our eyelid and think it's a problem because it's quite normal, right? And we're also not going to think it's a big deal if somebody talks about rape or sexual abuse or violence in a relationship, because it's allowed on the screen, so it must be okay in real life as well. And that's a problem if you think about how many women in this country live in the state of perpetual fear, or in relationships where they have no respect, or in relationships where they have no safety. But nobody talks about options as how do you deal with that? How do you fix a relationship which is abusive? Because we don't allow people to talk about those things. We say it's their private thing. Nobody else should have any influence or impact, which is very, very problematic, right? So the model that I use mostly in my counseling is the OAT classification, which means that either the young person gets an opportunity, because most porn addicts, they start from their early teens. So from the age of 10, 12, 15, 18, they stumble onto a website. The thing is, if you think about what it does to our neuroscience, and I have a little video that would explain it in a really good way, when you look at pornography, it generates dopamine in our brain. And dopamine is the chemical which we get from other drugs as well. So there is dopamine when we take cocaine, for instance. There's dopamine when we take any other addictive substance, or soft or hard drugs, any of those, right? So when a young person is given the opportunity, and this means when a child is given access to a mobile device without any filters, or iPad or laptop, whatever they have, without any filters, you know how risky that is. How, if you think about the dangers, really, traditionally we used to call something stranger danger was a thing. When I was growing up, we used to be told, you don't talk to strangers, and the whole thing about stranger danger doesn't apply anymore, because the thing that is really getting to us is in our hands, is in our bedrooms, is really accessible to young people. So as parents, inshallah, potential parents, you might have siblings, inshallah, most of you will be mothers and fathers one day. It's really important to understand this is, even if you think this doesn't relate to you today, it's really important to be vigilant and understand how we approach this in the future. Now, there's a combination between opportunity and trauma. So with Nadia, actually, what happened was that because she had trauma in her childhood, the minute she was given the opportunity, so the minute she accidentally stumbled onto pornography, she couldn't stop. She just couldn't stop. And that is because she has a profile of a vulnerable child. Now, if she wasn't exposed to all the abuse that her father gave both to her and her mother, the chances are her self-esteem would have been better. She would have expected better behavior from herself. But because that wasn't the case, unfortunately, she became a porn addict. Now, the third thing is between opportunity, attachment, and trauma, which again means that some children, when they have an attachment disorder growing up, they also can become porn addicts. This is just a classification between different types of addiction. So we know that the behavior addiction, which is porn, gambling, and eating disorder, is also addiction. So we don't think about people who are becoming obese and overweight. They actually have an addiction to food, and now people are using cognitive behavior therapy to treat those issues. Now the thing is, why is porn a bigger issue than drugs, for instance? Because of its easy access, because of the affordability. You don't need to spend a single penny and you can watch porn, right? And because of the fact that it keeps people anonymous, right? So what I want to do now is play a little video for you, which should, I think one of you guys will have me. Do you think the video is here? Or? I've got it in the USB if it's... Okay. Right.
Our brains are full of neural maps. Every time we learn something, we create a new neural map in our brain. So, for example, you might have a neural map about cooking a meal. You may have a neural map that is around learning French or maybe learning to drive. And in fact, the more you practice that skill, the deeper that map becomes, the stronger it becomes in our brain, to the point where you don't even have to think about it very much anymore. So initially, when you started learning to drive the car, you had to think very consciously about where the gear stick was and where the accelerator and the brake was. But over time, as that neural map in your brain becomes stronger and stronger, those actions and behaviours just become automatic. Now, unfortunately, that also happens with addiction. Sex addiction rewires the brain. It creates a new neural map. And one of the key things that helps us remember those maps is a chemical called dopamine. Dopamine is a chemical that is the common denominator in all addiction. It's a chemical that reminds us of the things that are most pleasurable in our lives. So something that triggers dopamine is something that is going to strengthen your neural map. So thinking of perhaps the map of England as a metaphor, imagine Brighton represents your addiction. Brighton represents your acting out behaviour. As someone who's been to Brighton, I know that it's a lovely place. It's very exciting. It's full of lots of different things to do. Somewhere you can lose yourself. Perhaps that's also true of your addiction. London represents everyday life. So you live in London, it's where your everyday life happens. But when you want a dopamine high, you go to Brighton. Now, if you go to Brighton on a regular basis in your addiction, if your acting out has become a regular thing that you do, then that neural pathway in your brain is going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. The more often you drive down that neural pathway, the stronger it will become. The more automatic it will become, like when you learn to drive a car. So that neural pathway in your brain, that road from London to Brighton, becomes a motorway. It becomes the M23, a fast, easy route to access dopamine. Recovery from addiction means not going to Brighton. And it means not thinking about Brighton either, because we know that when you fantasise, you actually trigger the dopamine pathway in the same way. You need never to go to Brighton again, so that that motorway can begin to get potholed and grow over. It will become weaker and weaker. But instead, you need to develop new roads, new ways of accessing dopamine. So let's think of some other coastal towns. Perhaps Portsmouth is going to represent another way you can access dopamine. That might be going out with friends. Maybe Littlehampton is playing golf. Maybe Eastbourne is taking up a new musical instrument. Maybe spending more time with family and friends, with loved ones is Bournemouth. Initially, when you start trying to access those neural pathways, they're going to be little B roads, and you might find yourself having to go to Bournemouth via Leeds. It may take a long time to get to that point of dopamine, and I'm sorry to say, but it's not going to be quite like Brighton. But if you're tempted to go back to Brighton again, you are just going to strengthen that neural pathway. What you have to do is keep going to Bournemouth, keep going to Portsmouth, keep accessing those other types of dopamine so that those roads can become stronger and stronger and stronger.
I don't know where your mouse is, sorry. Okay. So Paula Hall is actually one of my colleagues, and she's done a lot of work around porn addiction, and she's actually a practicing Christian. And while I was working along Paula, what I recognize is that Christianity actually talks almost all about the prevention. Spiritually, if you think about how do Christians approach preventing all this, is more or less the same things that we Muslims talk about. So one of the key things in recovery is guarding our eyes, for instance. And we know as Muslims that is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us in the Quran, that we should lower our gazes, right? So in the treatment, one of the things is about lowering the gaze. So what I'm trying to say to you is that when we think about the spiritual healing, there is a lot about psychological overlap with the spiritual strategies that we already have in Islam. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the solutions, we need to know that Allah knew obviously this was going to be a fitna for us, and we have to accept it. Unless we accept our problem, we're not going to think about resolving it because we wouldn't know. Now, the impact of porn, again, it's quite crucial. If you think about what this does, there is So violence against women is one of the things which becomes quite obvious in relationships because of all this. Men, unfortunately, who view a lot of porn, what happens to them is they can't sexually perform very well afterwards if it becomes a prolonged thing. They have huge issues in their own relationships. So with the client that I referred to earlier, he was having a lot of issues in his intimacy because of the fact that he was addicted to porn. It becomes a problem in terms of fear of intimacy. A lot of people cannot be intimate with a real person because their brains, over the years, they are used to just looking at intimacy on a screen kind of a thing. And that is not normal. It's altered in a sense that it's all larger than life. So whatever people view in porn is not normal because people are not like that. Relationships are not like that. And that's why I make that link that we need to teach our young people what relationships are. We don't talk about that. So how many of us would you agree that when we think about marriage, we worry a lot about the wedding day, the preparation, the clothes, the guests, the decor, the coordination, the shopping. How much do we prepare for the marriage? We don't prepare for the marriage. We don't talk about intimacy. We don't talk about rights and responsibilities. We don't really look at that. So where would a young person know how to be intimate in a halal way? How would we learn that if we're not going to talk about it? Who are we going to go to? Young people might just ask their friends, but what do their friends know? They don't know much. And then what is their source of knowledge? These sites and programs like Game of Thrones. How many of you, by the way, has watched a TV show called Hannah Montana growing up? So how many of you follow Miley Cyrus's career as a singer? Right. So the thing with that is that Hannah Montana became a role model for a lot of young girls because every single week, so many times people were watching her. She was a cute little girl, and then people followed her progression as a star. And was it last year or the year before, one of her songs was actually shocking, because that song, the lyrics of that song were actually about rape, not love, rape. And it became a trending song. Sorry? So can you imagine that such a, and the thing is that people like Miley Cyrus, what they say to you is that they say to you that they're very confident, they're really in control of how they look, but the problem is that what they don't realize is that these producers and directors have actually groomed these young girls. So from a very young age, it's almost allowed that this is how you should be. And if you normalize that, then talking about rape in a pop song, in a R&B song, it normalizes. The whole thing about pop culture is that it has normalized rape and violence against women. Hence now we're looking at... Well, we can call it cockiness. We can minimize it and say, well, lads do this. This is what men do. This is what we do, right? But we can minimize it. But we've minimized enough for this year for a thing like Harvey Weinstein to happen, for the whole globe to go crazy and talk about it happened to me, it happened to me, it happened to me. How? And it's not just in the West. It's in Pakistan. It's in Saudi Arabia. It's in Egypt. So what is that telling you? If so many women are saying to you, I was sexually harassed and I couldn't tell anybody, whether I'm a doctor, whether I'm a professor, whether I work in a local petrol station or whatever, what is that telling you? That is telling you that we're doing something really wrong here. And we have to wake up and look at what's happening. How are we treating women? What's going on? So I think this whole thing about numbness and disembodiment is very, very important, because what it does is that it takes away emotion from an action. So if intimacy, if sex is outside a committed relationship, it doesn't have any emotion, because there's no responsibility attached to it. And we know that in Islam, when a man and a woman become each other's clothing, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows them to be in a committed, loving relationship, in Allah's eyes, when the nikah happens, that man, he takes on the responsibility that the father had for that girl. And he has to look after her. He becomes the wali for that, the kavam for that young girl, right? So that means the social, the emotional, the kindness, all those things, the psychological. So the husband is not just somebody who brings money. He has a lot more to do in the relationship, right? And that's another topic, inshallah. I'll come for that another time. Talking about, there are more brothers here, so talking about the responsibility men have in a relationship. And again, I think culturally we've got it so wrong. We don't want to talk about the whole thing about the Prophet ﷺ coming home from a long day of work and coming through the door with a beautiful smile, kissing his wife on the forehead, and getting on with the housework. Okay, do I need to broom the house? Do I need to do the dishes? I mean, can you imagine? Who on this face of earth has ever been more busy than our beloved Prophet ﷺ? Right? Doing all sorts of things, being the top army guy, being the ambassador, being a teacher, being a da'i, and yet his responsibility in the house was such that he had no issues coming home and getting on with the dishes. How many Asian men, I'm really sorry, I'm stereotyping here, but how many of you have you ever seen your fathers? Well, I think in a way Pakistan is not the place to talk about these, because most of you have maids in your houses doing those kind of things anyway, right? So I don't think any of you have seen the kitchen a lot, especially the boys. How often do you go into the kitchen?
Daily.
Well, if you live daily, interesting, good. But that's quite impressive, right? I wonder, what do you do when you go in there?
I'm a vegan, I have to make my own food.
Well, good for you. That's impressive again. That's good, right? Well done. I think that's a role model right there for you. But realistically speaking, the gender division, if you think about it, we've got it wrong again. I feel that has a lot to contribute when we look at these things, right? I'm just going to quickly sum this up and talk about what happens. Now, people often say to me, okay, we know it's haram. Why can't we just have that resilience and inner strength and say, okay, this is the last time, I'm never going to watch porn again. May Allah forgive me. I'll fast and I'll try and, build a better relationship with the masjid. And why doesn't it happen? Why do people like my case studies, Usman and Nadia, why do they stay in that perpetual cycle of addiction? What's going on for them? Now the problem is that when people act out, and the whole thing about watching, or we call that acting out, right? They act out, then instantly the whole thing about shame and regret kicks in. Then they kind of say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to, make sure I wake up for Fajr, and, going to the gym as well, sit with my mom, maybe you do all the right things that I should be doing. So tick, 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 doing all the right things for a few days, maybe for a couple of weeks, and then a trigger will happen. Trigger would be, somebody did really bad in the exams, or they had a relationship issue, or they are going through a financial crisis, or something happened which meant that the repressed memories of their childhood abuse comes to the surface. And as soon as the trigger will happen, there will be preparation. Okay, I need to be in the room by 9 o'clock, make sure I have the laptop ready, and then people act out again. Now, there are ways we can prevent that, and inshallah, that's what I really want to talk about now. The key is that we know that addiction thrives in shame and secrecy. And that's the thing. What do you think we've learned from when we talk about how Adam a.s. was driven away from heaven by shaitan? And that the whole story is that what shaitan really wanted to do afterwards, when Adam was sent to the earth, was to make him feel just kind of, you've lost it now, there is no point. But what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did as a mercy? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught Adam how to seek forgiveness. And Adam took that opportunity. So he faced it. Any issue that we have, the key is to face it and accept it. And then obviously recognizing that it's a problem, we can't minimize it. We can't just brush it under the carpet. And then obviously we fight it. And I think that's what we're doing here. And I'm really so proud of you young people, because that's each one of you that took the courage today to come here and sit in front of me. You're doing all those things. So you're recognizing that this is something which applies to us as a community. And this is a quotation which I really like. So this is from Paula Hall's book. Paula is the lady that you just heard on the video. And what Paula says is, like all sinners, the addict needs to painfully unlearn old habits, to dismantle all scenarios, to pay all debts, and then to move steadfastly along the road to recovery, one small, secure step at a time. So it could take 6 months, it could take a year. But the trouble is that if somebody has done something for years in secrecy, we can't just fix them like that. They will make the right intention, then they would be okay for a few weeks, then they might have a little slip again. And like I said, slip means a small lapse in progress. Slip doesn't mean that there's no hope for those people, right? Now I just want to talk to you about some of the treatment options. These are all free online resources. These are things that you can just Google and you can find help, inshallah. Now the first one, think about the first one. The first one says, purify your gaze. Now Purify Your Gaze is an American-based website, or Canadian, I believe, and it is run by Muslims. Now the fact that there are organizations out there actually giving you free help means that people do recognize that this is a big problem that our ummah is facing. All these, like I said, all of these resources are free of charge. The last one, Jihad Against Porn, is actually, it's just a blog, I think. People who've been through addiction, they talk about their own experiences and stuff. I just want to add here that Click to Kick is an 8-week course which people can enroll anonymously and go on, and it gives you options as to how to seek help online. We have been fortunate enough in Birmingham, because I've come from Birmingham, that last month what I did, because I did one of these seminars for our local community, and we've been, alhamdulillah, fortunate to win some funding for a 2-year project, and that project, inshallah, I'll be leading on that, and my hope is that it will be free for young Muslims in the UK, because a lot of my clients, unfortunately, they're young people like yourselves, they're university students who don't have money to pay. So when I charge, obviously I charge quite a lot, and unfortunately students can't pay because they're students. So we have, but there's hope for you, obviously. You're not going to be students for too long. inshallah. So the click to kick is going to be for a Muslim version for that is going to be free for all young people, inshallah. And my hope is that people can tap into it from anywhere across the world. So it's not just going to be for the UK people, inshallah. Right. So now this is some of the stuff that you guys can have on the. So can I just ask, out of interest, how many of you have filters on your mobile devices and your laptops and stuff? Filters?
But the government has it for everything.
That's it? That's it? No other filters? So you rely on this government that we have that's gone every few months.
They're really good.
You're relying on them? God help
Trust me,
you.
it's really good.
Sorry?
Trust me, it's really good.
Well,
Ask all of it.
I think the difficulty is that in all the world, in the Western world, I'm talking about places like the UK and America, when you go and buy an electronic device, a laptop, an iPad, or whatever, the person that you're buying it from, that they have to install things for you. So parents can ask for softwares that could block a lot of things. So you can even type words that would be completely blocked from your mobile phone and stuff. So filters like the Covenant Eyes, again, if you think about that, Covenant Eyes is again, it's a Christian initiative which gives people the opportunity to download that, and so that any material that is not suitable for our eyes is not there. And that's our responsibility. We have to look at what's happening to our devices and what do we have on that. Key 9, again, is a really good web protection. And I would encourage you guys, investigate, look into that and see what you guys can have here in Pakistan, inshallah. For those who are struggling with the porn addiction, one of the things that I do with my clients is that I take their smartphones away from them for 9 weeks. So they have to go to the old Nokia brick phone. How many of you have actually used the Nokia brick phone? Okay, right, yeah. How many of you have Nokia brick phone today? But that's still impressive. You know, last time when I asked, there wasn't a single person in the room, and there were more people than this. So that's still impressive. If you have that, fantastic. So what I would suggest to people is that it's a detox. So what do we do in the detox? We completely let go of things that are really important for us, for our health, right? So one of the key things is that you switch to brick phone, and you also have a complete detox for 9 weeks. Because the thing with 9 weeks is that the neuroscientists, they say that it takes 9 weeks for our brain to kind of let go of the neural pathway that Paula was talking about. So 9 weeks, no social media, no gadgets. So how many of you have Instagram, Snapchat, I don't know, all of those? Most of us, right? So, sorry?
Something wrong with that side of the room.
You think they're just being more honest. Bless them. It's important to understand and respond to our triggers. Now, who understand what do I mean by trigger? When I talk about trigger, what is a trigger?
Catalyst.
Sorry?
A catalyst.
Yes, exactly. Something that would prompt you to do something. So, how many of you struggle with road rage when somebody? Oh, how many of you has a really big anger thing when they're driving? Well, driving in Pakistan is quite scary, but so you get really angry when you're driving. You don't. How many of you do? So some of you do, right? So when you're driving and people are kind of, I don't know how you manage it without getting angry, because it is difficult driving here, right? So it's important to understand what triggers me. So trigger might mean somebody would say something to me and it would trigger an emotion in me. It could make me angry, it could make me sad, it could frustrate me, might wake up a lot of suppressed memories. So it's important to recognize what upsets me. So it's about connecting with yourself, learning to be emotionally intelligent. How many of you have heard the term emotional intelligence? Right. So emotional intelligence is about connecting with our emotions, understanding why am I feeling this, like this, why is the other person feeling like this? And that's a really important thing, right? And that's what people are focusing a lot about. it's important to have an accountability partner. So that one person, it could be your therapist, it could be that friend that you really trust, that you can go and talk to them and you can say to them, I've had a relapse, and they won't judge you. So your accountability partner can only be the person who's not going to hear your story and go and blast it on social media. That's not your accountability partner. Your accountability partner is who is fearful of your hereafter, who wants your hereafter to be positive. So that's what you need in an accountability partner. And going back to the point I made earlier is finding a balance between mind, body and soul, right? And it's very important. This is what I do with my clients is you talk about the inner values and strength. So you look at yourself and say, I'm a good person. I come from a good family. I have a future. I can do things differently. And you connect with your own inner values and strengths. I think that's very important. So these are some of the most important things that we do in the treatment model is we do face-to-face work, we do group work. It's important to develop a healthy lifestyle because it's really important. What we eat has a huge impact on how we behave as well. So this thing about consuming a lot of junk food, unfortunately, a lot of chocolate, it's lovely, but unfortunately, it has a huge impact. Now, those of us who remember movies in the 80s and 90s when smoking was such a trendy thing. Remember James Bond with a cigarette and cigar and all those things. And eventually they realized that there's a thing called passive smoking, which means that people who are not smoking, but in that environment, it's really harmful for them, right? So we've come a long way from that. So it's important to recognize that we need a healthy lifestyle when it comes to these things, and we make that link with what we're watching with the media. It's also important to discuss what we think positive sexuality is, because like I said, this is quite important. What do we mean by positive sexuality? What does that mean? What is our inner understanding of sexuality? Where have we learned that? Because I feel that young people aren't given an opportunity to even talk about it. So anything that a child has learned at the age of 5, 6, 7 would become an imprint in their subconscious, and that's how they would reference this whole thing. It's important to kind of connect ourselves with the masjid. That's a key thing, and that's what I use in the therapy as well. And then obviously lowering our gaze is very important. Right. So I'm just going to skip this through because obviously we don't have a lot of parents here, but if you're interested, I think the key thing is that we need open communication. I hope, inshallah, most of you young people here, when you become parents, you will allow your children to talk to you about anything, right? And what we do is we address the issue that the child has in a way that they would understand. So I'm not saying that you talk about inappropriate stuff to your children. But if we as adults don't allow young people to come to us, now both my clients could not go and talk to their parents because they were too fearful that mom would be upset or mom would be sad or dad would think it's all your fault. So we should give our children the permission that if they're worried about something, they can come to us and they can talk to us. It's important to limit the screen time that young people have. And we can only do that as adults if we're if we're leading by example. We can't be on our phones 24/7 and then expect our young children to behave differently, because children are visual learners. We can't just give them a good speech about something. Unless we practice what we preach, we're not going to be good role models. And we know the danger is that the phones go to bedrooms with children. How many of us know what children do when they have their mobile devices in their hands by their bed? We don't know what they're up to. How can we trust? Would you just trust a stranger in your child's room? You wouldn't. So how come we are so complacent that we allow a mobile phone to sleep in that child's bedside and that child can tap into anything? We don't know. So we have to be realistic. And we have to be really vigilant about these things. And it's important to talk about consequences about all these things as well. Right, so as a community, as LUMS community, what can you guys do? The first thing is that we have compassion. And compassion is something that we learn from our deen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us that we protect ourselves and our families from hellfire. We know that the Prophet ﷺ was rahmatul alameen for all of humanity, not just for practicing people who are on the who they believe are on the righteous path, but the Prophet ﷺ came as compassion for the whole of humanity. So that's what we do as people. We approach this with compassion and we communicate. Again, that's what you guys are doing here, and I'm really very proud of you and really honored to be here. And the third thing that we need to do as a community is talk about these things. And again, that's what we're doing. Finding a way to talk about the possibility of counseling for issues like porn addiction. So I think these are the 3 C's that are very, very important. And obviously this is the dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us in the Quran. And it's important that we constantly seek refuge from the shaitan, because nobody of us can claim that they've attained a place where they're far from shaitan's reach. We know that's not possible. That's absolutely impossible. We need, like I said, we need a good balance between our bodies, our souls, and our minds. And unless we start focusing on these things, I promise you, we will have problems. We can be intellectually doing quite well. We can go to the gym every day, have our 6-packs or whatever, but unless we address the issues of the nafs, we're not going to go further far. And that's what West is now reclining towards. This whole thing about whether it's meditation, whether any kind of spiritual angle that the West is now seeking for is the balance. They know they have missed it. And now, like I said, they've gone the other extreme and they're coming back. We don't need to go to the other extreme. We are the people who are given this hadayah from the Prophet ﷺ anyway, so we just stay in the middle. We don't need to go to either of the extremes. I think that's very, very important. I'm just going to finish off by talking about 12 steps, which is one of the key recovery things in all sorts of addictions. How many of you heard of Russell Brand? He's a stand-up comedian, right? So he's an interesting character. He is. He says intelligent things, but he comes across as really bizarre. So he is somebody who suffered all sorts of addictions. So he's done drugs, he's done alcohol, and he's unfortunately been into porn for a very long time. He wrote this book last year called Recovery. And Recovery basically talks a lot about 12 steps. And the whole thing about 12 steps is it's a program that Americans use, it's a program that people in New Zealand use, it's a program that UK uses, and this is the program that we're kind of incorporate in the work that we're doing with our clients as well. All these 12 steps, kind of what they do is bring you back to the fact that we surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the focus that an addict needs. And I'm just going to leave you with that thought, inshallah, and finish here, inshallah. Make dua for all of you, and I request that you do the same for me. And I'm happy to take any questions if you have at this point for me, inshallah. The next one? 7-12. There you go. Any questions? Yes, please.
First of all, thank you so much for being here. What I want to ask was that how you went through this material. The approach was going from religious to these psychological concepts, or was it the other way around? How did you approach this problem?
So, in terms of treatment, or how do I look at this?
In terms of all of this understanding.
Okay. So I feel for me, as a practicing person, I can't separate the two. So I can't be a professional without being a Muslim professional. So I feel that we have to overlap everything in a sense that we understand. Like I said, if you think about the treatment, it's really important to address this from the concept of that we can deal with this. A person who has this problem, this is just part of their problem. That doesn't mean that we discard them or you know the famous saying that says, all saints once had a past and all sinners have a future. So that's how we approach it. That Islamically, our approach can't be that just because this person has made a mistake or they're doing this, they can't be healed. So that's what the psychology does as well. I hope that's what you're asking, right? Okay. Any other questions?
Okay, so we have some anonymous questions.
Sure.
Can there be some other reasons except childhood trauma for this addiction?
Yes. So like I said, there are three reasons. One is opportunity, which is the most prominent one. That people are exposed to this material. That's the number one thing. Now, trauma makes that person vulnerable. So trauma means that this person is weaker in their character because they don't have the inner strength. You know, in a school playground, there is a profile of a bully, the person who bullies, and there is a profile of a victim. So the victim would be the child who doesn't have enough self-esteem at home, who is abused at home as well, and unfortunately their self-esteem isn't great, and in the playground the bully will choose to pick the victim that would be bullied. So opportunity is a big thing, and then obviously trauma, and then the whole thing about how that person has attachment disorders. Now, attachment disorder means that that child does not have enough relationship with their parents. So growing up, their mother didn't really give them enough love, or their father wasn't there as a positive role model for that young person. So there are three ways that we look at this.
People who have had
Sorry, I'll come to you in a minute. Thank you.
people who had childhood trauma and are currently hypersexualized or have troubles with emotions. So what you're suggesting is that they should target their childhood traumas first, and through that they'll be able to recover from this hypersexualization emotional issues.
That's exactly the idea, that you have to give closure to your childhood wounds. Now, I'm trained in a psychodynamic way, which means that I look at, so I would draw a genogram and look at what was this adult as a child. Did they have enough love? What was happening in their childhood? So that is really important. So giving closure to the childhood is very important. Issues from the childhood is very important. And then reframing, then accepting more, then going through these 12 steps. So that's exactly what needs to happen. I'm going to come back to you, inshallah, after.
You talked about that, about how parents should not let their children use their pets with a cell phone because it has negative effects. So how can parents practice that in a time when this thing has become very common? And how can they let their children know that they are doing this for their own good? Because I have seen children who grow hatred or negative feelings towards their parents because they think that their parents are restricting them and not letting them be like the whole world. So how can the parents do it in a way that the children would know that they are doing it
For their benefit. I think that's a really good question. And there are different ways. Sorry. So that's a really good question. Jazakallah for that. I think the key is, like I said, communication. So it's important for the parents not just to snatch the device away. If we have communication between parents and children, the parents can explain to them, talk to them about what's out there that's dangerous, right? So that open communication will allow that child to understand that the decision that the parent is making, the parents have a right, they have the authority. And I think with parenting, a lot of stuff that's gone wrong is the parents have lost a lot of authority as parents. So it's important to have that communication. And the second thing is that parents have to be role models. So one of the things that we talk about in our parenting programs is that from 9 onwards, it needs to be a media-free zone in the house. So everybody, whether there are 3 people that live in their house or 5 or 10, whatever, they all leave their mobile phones in the living room, for instance, including mom and dad and the older siblings. So we lead by example. So if mom is on Facebook at 1 o'clock in the morning, she has lost that moral authority to tell the child that you can't be on your phone, right? So I think it's about gradually introducing something and then be persistent and then working through it, inshallah. Yes.
In this age of individualism, being allowed to choose what we want to wear is an integral part of being empowered. So, actresses are also like the role model for many of their fans. So, and when they are allowed to wear what they want to, this is actually what being empowered, because they should be allowed to, we should not police their clothing. So where do we draw the line? Like, where do we say that, no, this should not be done, this should be done?
Right, so that's a wider question. Nobody should impose or nobody else as to what they should wear or not wear. That obviously it's always a personal choice between that person. I can't stand here and tell people what they should or not should wear. I think the important thing is that if we raise our girls in such a way that we tell them, we challenge the mainstream narrative. We talk to our girls that they are more than what visually you can see. They're intelligent, they're capable, they're worthy, they can do a lot of things. And if you think about what this patriarchal system, unfortunately, in the East has done, why do young Eastern girls look towards Western role models? Because they feel that this is how they will feel empowered. Now we know that we've equated modernization with Western values. So, and that's very problematic, because you could be very forward thinking and you could be a very Eastern looking person, right? There's nothing that stops you from the, and what we have seen in the West now, and I'm quite proud and quite positive about this change in the last 10 years, is that there's a thing called conservative feminism which is coming out of the West. So young Muslim girls in the West now, what they're doing is they're looking at young people, especially females in the West, and they're saying, well, look, what does that mean? You're having eating disorders. You're having Botox injected into your lips. You're having enhanced eyelashes. You're having enhanced nails. You're having, unfortunately, enhanced breast implants. There's nothing that's you anymore. So everything that is visual about you is for the pleasure of somebody else. So the counter narrative for that is that, which is what I call the conservative feminism, which is, well, I revert back to my deen, because I should choose how much the other should look at me or not look at me. It can't be somebody else's choice, right? So I think it's about going back to how we're dealing with our young girls. This whole thing about labeling girls that they can only do this much in life. I feel that it's really important that we look at the whole thing and allow girls to connect with their self. So their self-worth does not come from how much they look nice on the media. So this whole thing about Instagram filters and stuff. I mean, I did a lot of research and looked into this whole thing about how many of you use the filters on Instagram and Snapchat and stuff. We all do, right? I mean, I know we all do, right? But the thing is, have you noticed that instantly the way our skin looks through that filter is nothing like our skin, right? There's absolutely no resemblance. But how many of us are comfortable to post a picture without a filter? Most of us kind of think, just temper a bit, make your skin look nice or whatever. By default, we think. And what that does is that means that the way I am is not good enough, because I need to change for the other person to accept me for what I am, not the person that I am in reality. So I feel that it's really important to give our young girls and boys, obviously, that confidence and connect with their inner personality, not their visual person. Does that answer your question?
We have another anonymous question.
Can
We'll
I-
take your question after.
Okay.
Do you acknowledge zina of eyes as a lesser evil instead of actually engaging in premarital sex? And would you recommend early marriage as a way to curb hypersexuality? But what can be done if one can't marry that early because of the social pressure from parents?
Okay. So we know that we can't minimize. I'm not saying that porn, it should be a legal thing, because we can't go and allow zina in the society. So visual zina, obviously the fornication of the eyes is just as bad. So nobody's saying that this can be an alternative for real relationships. We all know that as a community, not just in Pakistan. I don't know about, to be honest with you, I don't know about the stats in Pakistan, but in the West we have this huge challenge where people are struggling to find good marriage partners, because the whole thing about how do you find an appropriate partner in the West when people are not socializing? You live in a community where there might not be many Muslims around you, so it becomes a big challenge. Now, how do we address that? I think that the important thing is, if you think about the model with all this, like I said, we need a good balance between mind, body, and soul. So when we think about treatments, a person who's struggling with porn addiction, because this is something that Islam addresses anyway. So who knows what the Prophet ﷺ said, what should people do when they're having this? Yes.
Try fasting.
Try fasting, try lowering your gaze, engage in other community service, engage in other things. So it's important to look at this. The approach has to be a holistic thing. So people in isolation are just going to fixate about sex and porn, because what are we seeking? If you think about sex, what is that? And I'm sorry, I have to be really open. about these things, but how else are we going to learn if we're not going to be open? So intimacy is what? Intimacy is a connection with another person. That's what, when we are intimate, that's what we're seeking. Now, the problem is that people who indulge in things inappropriately, a lot of time they're seeking something. They're seeking approval, they're seeking security, and they want validation. A lot of girls and boys at a young age, when they indulge in relationships, and extra relationships, sexual relationships at a very young age, what they're seeking is validation from the other person. So they don't have that connection with their family and friends. So it's important to, like I said, have a good balance between our bodies, our social life, and obviously our spirituality. So staying indoors is dangerous. So what do we do with our evening? So if I don't have anything planned for the evening, that's worrying. Why don't I have anything planned for the evening? Why am I not going to visit a neighbor, go and do some community work? Why am I not doing something where I'm engaging with other people? So all those things are important.
Okay, you talked about how sexualization leads to objectification of women and distorts one's view of what should be tender passion in sex. If, as a feminist, I have a healthy respect for women and a tender view of both love and sex, what can pornography possibly do negatively impact my life from a psychological perspective, not a religious one?
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question. I feel that it's important to understand that this is not a debate between feminism at all. So I'm not rejecting the fact that women can view themselves in a certain way. I'm not rejecting the fact that women should not be empowered in any form or shape. The reality is that my approach to this whole thing is that it becomes, so for instance, in the West, for some people, watching pornography can be a lifestyle choice. Because in West, obviously, if you're not a practicing Christian, Hindu, Muslim, whatever, people can come home after a long day of work and they can just watch porn because, they have nothing better to do. But the problem is that it becomes problematic psychologically, and there's evidence that says that it tampers with their minds. Because the connection that a person develops with something on the screen alters how they really think about that thing. Now, unfortunately, this whole porn industry, there's so much evidence that women and men who come, and there was, I think on one of the things that you sent me actually, Gohar, was somebody mentioned a documentary by one of my favorite people as well, Leo. So I don't know whether that person is in the audience or not. So he did this whole series where he went to, he's a UK-based journalist actually, and he went to the United States and he actually studied what leads to the sex workers into porn industry, right? And we think that maybe it's a lifestyle choice. People just fancy, I'm not going to work in the supermarket, or I don't want to be a hairdresser or a doctor, I want to be a porn artist. We assume that's an empowered choice that person has made. Unfortunately, that's not the reality. The reality is that these people are actually quite oppressed and they have a lot of issues. So it's actually sex slavery that we frown upon, and we talk about sex slavery these days. It's quite hyped up in what's happening in with ISIS and stuff, and we talk about sex slaves through ISIS as well, right? And we talk about sex slavery in the inner villages of India or Pakistan or whatever. Now, what I'm trying to say to you that oppression is oppression, whether it's happening in Hollywood or whether it's happening in India or whether it's happening in Saudi Arabia, right? So it's the same thing. We can't say that porn artists are choosing to become porn artists, because maybe 1 or 2% might be. But the statistics are telling us that these people are doing what they're doing because of financial gains, because of other issues that they have psychologically. So it's not really a normal choice of somebody's career that they would want to take. And I really feel that that's an important discussion to have. We're not rescuing them. We're having that open discussion that why do these people end up where they are? Because of, if you think about the dangers that they're, the sexually transmitted diseases, the whole thing, it's quite horrible. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes.
There was just another part in the previous question that
Sorry.
early marriage was a solution. Can you please talk to me?
Yeah, okay. So obviously, we know that our deen kind of promotes that, and that's one of the recommendations that the deen has, that children, when they get to a certain age, it's recommended that that there should be possibility. But we know that that's not our reality. We know that that's not possible for everybody. But it's really important that we recognize that there is a solution. So the solution isn't that I can't go out and I make a girlfriend, then porn is the lesser of the two evil. That's not the solution. The solution is that till that time that I can be in a relationship, what are other things that I can do with my time? So how do I engage in healthy activities? Now, a lot of people, and I know because I work with porn addicts, a lot of people say, you know, Sister Abeda, when I go to the gym, I release a lot of stress and I feel quite better. So some people would choose gym over watching porn for 2 hours, because that's their stress releasing mechanism. So it's about being open and honest as to what's going to work for that person. But they're obviously alternatives. Yeah? Okay.
Okay, so one more question.
I'll come back to you. Or can I please, if that's okay, please.
You said that having a sexualized society is a problem. That's why it is, because if it makes me more careful about my body, while if it forces me to go to the gym and be more careful about how I live, then why it is the problem? Having a sexualized society in of itself is a problem, or maybe these are the consequences that you are talking about.
Well, I think they both go hand in hand. The problem is that the pressure that young people feel. If it was a question of choice, because it becomes a norm, everybody is expected to look the same way. Now, if you think about the whole thing about how many branded bags somebody has, how many branded clothes people wear, you know, the whole pressure of being accepted in a certain way. Now that's material, but now the problem is that this whole thing about sexualization means that young girls feel that if they don't look a certain way, if they don't dress a certain way, people will take them less seriously. I know mothers who worry about their girls wearing hijab, they're not going to get good jobs you know, this whole thing about Islamophobia. You guys have no idea what a privilege it is to live in a Muslim community. We you know, the post 9/11 thing has hit us really hard. So this whole thing about you go for an interview and people might just judge you because you have a headscarf. That's ridiculous, isn't it? Because that person might be really capable, you know, they might be just as good as the white counterpart that came for that interview. But 9/11 has done really horrible things for us. So I feel that the problem is that it's not giving women the choice, it's actually taking choice away from women. That's what sexualization is doing. It's saying everybody should look the same. Every girl should look like Hannah Montana. Every boy should look like Justin Bieber or whoever I don't know, I'm sorry. So that's problematic, right? And I think that's where the problem is.
Okay, so one more question.
Sorry, I'm going to, can I, or would you want, there's somebody behind you, so.
Okay, please.
And then I'll come to you, sorry.
You talked about the concept of positive sexuality.
Yeah.
So young people, when they're having addictive or sexualized bad habits, to generalize it, so when they're trying to get rid of it, so I think they're essentially shunning or they're shunning it instead of, so in a way, they're absolutizing it. Either they're walked into it or they're shunning it altogether, not realizing that this is something permissible under certain conditions. So the quotation that circulates on social media is that Islam does not it does not eliminate desire, it just
regulates it. Yeah.
So I think it does not eliminate desire, it just
regulates it. Yeah.
So I think if you could elaborate more on the aspect of positive sexuality and how it could be disseminated to young people so that they don't live in extremes. They either shun the concept of being sexual altogether, which is a temporary phase, as you said that.
Yeah, the
it
regret
is temporary
phase.
and it eventually leads you, so you keep swinging between extremes like a pendulum.
Yeah.
So in order to have a balance, you ought to. So please, if you could elaborate.
That's again, that's a really good That's a really good question, and I think it's very important to be able to talk about positive sexuality. When I talk about positive sexuality, what do I mean? Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, any emotion that we have, whether it's lust, whether it's gluttony, whether it's pride, whether it's happiness, whether it's sadness, whether it's guilt, whether it's greed, we know these are all things that Allah has given us. Anger is an emotion that Allah gave us, although the Prophet ﷺ said, don't get angry. But that's an emotion that we have in us, right? So this whole thing about sexuality is Allah is the one who's put these emotions in us, right? And they're normal. The first thing is that we normal sexuality. We say that it's okay to talk about, to think about this. Not fantasize it obsessively, obviously, that becomes another problem. But we have to understand that these are emotions that Allah has given us. And what is positive sexuality? This is about being okay with what we are, what Allah has given us as bodies, accepting my body the way Allah has made us, rather than worrying about my waist needs to be this size, or my bust needs to be this side, or I need to be this. And have you noticed that there's so much pressure on girls? Why not so much pressure on boys? Not that I want boys to struggle with the same thing. And interestingly enough, the West now has a big problem called body dysmorphia, which means that both boys and girls now don't like the way they look. And this is not just a thing for girls. Boys also increasingly are having eating disorders, where they assume that the anorexia is becoming, it used to be traditionally a disorder just for girls, where they would think they're fatter than they actually are, but now it's becoming an issue for boys as well, right? So this is not just a female problem, unfortunately, anymore. So positive sexuality is about thinking of myself in a healthy way, and thinking that I'm worthy of being in a committed relationship. One day I will be in a relationship where the other person will love me, respect me, honor me, and fulfill my desires, right? So that's the shift that we need to make. Because when we think about porn is just objectification and exploitation. So a lot of porn industry, unfortunately, what used to be porn in the 80s now is not even considered as a big deal, because things have gone from, because if you think about how dopamine works, is that, for instance, if you are driving a Nissan Micra as a car, and then you have a racing car, then obviously if you driving your racing car, the Micra or a smaller vehicle is not going to be as exciting. So that's the problem. When people are, and what you're saying, that we swing between extremes. So the important thing is that connect with ourselves and appreciate ourselves. So self-esteem, how many of us understand the concept of self-esteem? Yeah, some of you do, mashallah. Self-esteem is self-respect. How do I like myself? How much, everybody has a voice in our heads. So with the voice in our head says, I'm fat, I'm horrible, I'm lazy, oh my God, why did you make that mistake? So the negative voice in the head, which Islamically we call those waswasas, right? And in psychology, there's a huge thing about the voice in the head. What does that say to us? So if my relationship with my body is negative, then obviously I can't develop positive sexuality. We can't have positive sexuality without thinking about it in a relational context. So the whole thing is bringing back the whole sexual thing into the marriage context, because you can't be sexual without a committed relationship. We do understand that because that's the boundary that Islam has given us. So I think what I'm trying to say to you, just to summarize that, I feel that it's important to connect with ourselves positively and expect better behavior from ourselves, and then embedding the whole thing about mind, body and soul. I hope that kind of makes sense, inshallah.
And if I could just add one
Please
thing
do.
which I think is important, is to embrace sexuality.
Of course.
Which is like what young people tend to do is they look at the example of some saints that they वो रहबानियत की राह इख्तियार कर ली, and how they went in the extreme. So the thing is that when you have a choice, like if you have cut off the choice, then so what I'm trying to say
I understand what you're saying. I do understand.
You embrace it, and then you discipline yourself, and then you do all the things that you said.
I think that's such a good point, and thank you so much for making. I really appreciate you saying that, because look, if we don't accept that, that means that we're leaving a door open for shaitan to temper with our thinking. So when we say and that's another thing in my parenting programs, I say to young parents, make sure that you talk to your children about these young crushes that young people have. You know, when they're 12, 14, 16, you like this singer, or those emotions that people have. What are they? What do you do with that feeling? What do you do with that feeling that you have that you like that person? What do you do? Do you drown yourself in sin? Do you feel like, oh my God, this needs... And that's where a lot of exploitation happens, because what is often infatuation is seen as love. Young people don't understand the difference. And unfortunately, a lot of infatuation then, without thinking, goes into love, and then goes into early marriage and goes into divorce within months. I mean, I see a lot of divorces, unfortunately, because there's no compatibility between two people. Sexual chemistry doesn't mean that two people are compatible. And there is the madhab who kind of say that there are times where masturbation is permissible purely because if it's going to, and that's not across the board, and I'm not a scholar, so don't quote me on this, but I know that was made permissible in the time when people were away from their wives, for instance. So our deen is very practical, and our deen allows us to talk about things, and I think that's the important thing.
Okay, last question for today.
Please.
How to repel sexual thoughts while interacting with opposite gender, and can you please tell how to act during a trigger?
Okay. So again, that's is there a cat around?
Yeah.
I'm a cat person, so I have a cat at home, so sorry. So, can he come in if he's allowed to? Right. So I've lost the thought of the question.
How to repel sexual thoughts while interacting with opposite gender.
Okay. Now, a few years ago, Yasir, how many of you know of Yasir Qadi? He's okay. So alhamdulillah, few of you know. Yasir Qadi he's a Pakistani scholar. His parents are from Pakistan. Obviously, he was born and raised in the West. He did a talk for the ISOCs. So ISOCs are Islamic societies in Britain, and then like you have the Muslim Student Federation in the United States. So what somebody asked Yasir Qadi was, how should people interact in the ISOCs, right? And it was such a good talk, because what Yasir Qadi talked about was this split personality that young people are now developing, which is very problematic. So when you're in the masjid, there are two different doors to get to the prayer area. And I don't know how your events are, but in most, even in England, there are events where brothers are sitting in a different room, sisters or there is a curtain in between, right? And as soon as people step into the ISOC or I'm not talking about your religious society, I'm just talking about what I've observed. I don't know what you guys do. You obviously are fantastic people. But it's almost a switch. So when we're talking to a practicing person, our gaze is low, and there's a lot of adab, and the body language is different. But we can't be two people, right? We can't switch personalities. So it's really important to teach young people what is the general adab, what are the general boundaries between interacting between a male and a female. Obviously, your colleagues, you study in lumps. You will be working alongside females. And sometimes females, they dress up in a provocative way. And that's a real challenge for the brothers. What do you do? How do you manage yourself? So what you're saying is how do you counter your negative thoughts or a trigger, right? So then the first thing is to acknowledge it. The second thing is to understand, this is how I'm feeling. So the whole thing about what we call taking your body temperature. Okay, so when you look at something, what was it doing to you physically? Your brain's all over the place. There's a fog in your head. How do you address that? So it's important to understand and kind of connect with what am I feeling and what are my options? What am I going to do? So then Islamically, what is the adab? Islamically, we know that Prophet ﷺ told us specifically when a man and a woman are just between the two of them, what is the third thing there? The third person there? It's the shaitan, right? So we know that. We all know that. I mean, it's just one of those things that everybody understands. So how do we minimize that? So the important thing is that we, as girls or as boys as well, if you know that's your trigger, then you make sure that you make sure that somebody else is with you when you're with that person, right? But it's important to acknowledge, okay, I like this person. When I see this person, this is how I'm feeling. It's okay to acknowledge that. It's important to address that. Because if we fester on things, because like I said, for a lot of young people, they might like one person this week, and 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they might like somebody else, right? And that's, unfortunately, that's how young people are. Their memory is small, and they go from switch from choices very quickly. So recognizing our triggers is important, and then addressing it is important. I think he's had enough of me, so I'm going to stop now, inshallah, and hope to see you all very soon. Jazakallah khair for this opportunity.